I pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped below the tree line, throwing long shadows across the gravel. The cabin stood where I left it, sturdy, practical, built to last, unlike some things. I killed the engine, sat there a moment, fingers tapping against the steering wheel. A man learns to trust his instincts, and mine had been humming for weeks. Something was off. The door creaked open under my hand, same as always. Inside, everything looked the same. Boots by the door, the faint scent of pine cleaner, a half-burned candle on the counter. But that wasn't how you spotted trouble. It was in the little things. The coffee cup in the sink when Rachel didn't drink coffee in the evenings. The slight shift in her schedule, the way her phone never left her side. A text screen flipped down when I walked into the room. I didn't go digging. Didn't need to. The truth has a way of surfacing if you know where to look. A knock on the door broke the quiet. Fiona stood there, wrapped in her usual shawl, her sharp eyes scanning me the way they always did. "You're back." She never wasted words. I nodded. "Been a few weeks." She sniffed, adjusting her grip on the cane. "Figured you'd want to know. Been seeing a car here when you're gone. Ain't hers. Some slick little thing, black, sits low to the ground. Doesn't belong to anyone around here." She was watching me for a reaction. I didn't give her one. Just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You see who was driving?" Her lips thinned. Didn't get a clear look. But it wasn't her usual crowd. A pause, then, softer, "You all right?" I exhaled through my nose, nodding. "Appreciate it, Fiona." She hesitated, then patted my arm with her bony hand before shuffling off. Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table, the old wood cool under my hands. I ran through the facts like I was back in the field, dissecting a mission. Her distance. The late nights. The way she'd started dressing like she used to before we settled down, like she was getting ready for something, someone. And now, the car. I opened my phone, stared at the screen. Thought about calling her, asking outright. But I already knew the answer. Asking was for men who wanted to be lied to. I wasn't one of them. Instead, I grabbed my keys. It was time to see it for myself. The town was quiet this late, the kind of quiet that settles in places where people wake up early and go to bed on time. The streetlights buzzed overhead as I pulled up across from the hotel, an old 3-story brick building with a clean front and a reputation for discretion. I stepped out of the truck, leaned against the hood, and waited. Patience was something I'd learned a long time ago. You don't rush when the truth is walking straight toward you. It took 20 minutes. Then I saw them. Rachel stepped through the glass doors first, laughing at something. Her head tilted back, her hair catching the light. She looked good, same way she did when we first met, back when everything was simple. She wasn't wearing her usual casual hiking gear. Instead, it was tight jeans, a fitted jacket, and those boots she used to say made her feel taller. She was trying. That was the part that got me. She was trying for him. Zachary followed. Close, but not touching. Like they were cautious, but not cautious enough. He looked exactly the way I figured he would. Slim, artsy. The type who probably thought talking about emotions counted as a personality. He had that jittery energy, like a man who'd never been punched in the mouth before. I stepped off the curb, closing the distance. Rachel spotted me first. The laugh died in her throat, her face freezing like someone had hit pause. Zachary didn't notice at first, still smirking about whatever joke he'd made. Then he followed her gaze and went pale. "Leo," Rachel started, but I wasn't looking at her. I had eyes on Zachary. "You must be Zachary." My voice came out steady, even. Not a question. His throat bobbed. Yeah." His hands twitched at his sides, like he couldn't decide whether to shove them in his pockets or raise them in surrender. I nodded once. Figured. Rachel stepped between us, reaching for my arm, but I didn't move. "Leo, listen, Not here to listen," I cut in. "Just making sure I'm seeing things right." My eyes flicked between them, taking in the way she shifted closer to him, like I was the problem in this equation. "Yeah, that about confirms it." Her mouth opened and closed. "Leo, it's not. It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's simple." Zachary finally found his voice. "Look, man, I know this isn't ideal, but..." I turned my head slightly. "Don't." He shut his mouth so fast his teeth clicked. Rachel's eyes darted around, checking if anyone was watching. Of course they were. A couple by the front desk, the clerk pretending not to hear. Small towns run on quiet gossip, and I just gave them enough for the week. I took a step back, looking at her one last time. "You want to be free?" I nodded toward him. There he is. Have at it. I turned on my heel and walked back to my truck. Didn't rush. Didn't look back. Whatever excuses or explanations she had, they weren't mine to listen to anymore. The wind cut sharp as I drove back to the cabin, the road dark and empty except for the occasional set of headlights passing the other way. My hands were steady on the wheel. My pulse, same as always. I'd been through worse. Hell, I'd survived worse men than Zachary Jacobs. The thing about betrayal, it doesn't shock you when you've seen enough of it. It just clarifies things. Strips away whatever softness was left and leaves you with the truth. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my decision was already made. Inside, I moved through the house like I was clearing a room. I grabbed a duffel from the closet, packed fast. Clothes, documents, tools. The things I needed. The rest? That was hers to deal with. I wasn't the kind of man to toss someone's life onto the front lawn, but I also wasn't the kind to sit in a house full of ghosts. I was rolling my shoulders, shaking off the stiffness, when my phone buzzed. Rachel. I let it ring. Then a message. Leo, please. Just talk to me. I shut the phone off, tossed it onto the counter. She made her choice. I made mine. Morning came cold and crisp. I loaded the truck and headed into town, the familiar streets quieter than usual, or maybe that was just me seeing them different. The coffee shop on Main was already half full, a few regulars nodding at me as I walked in. I nodded back, ordered black coffee, and took it to a corner table. I wasn't there for the coffee. I was there for information. Vincent Clark came in 10 minutes later, shaking the cold off his coat as he made his way toward me. Mid-50s, built like a man who never stopped working, sleeves pushed up over forearms crisscrossed with old scars. He slid into the chair across from me, fixing me with that knowing look. Heard you made a scene last night, he said, voice rough from years of smoking. I sipped my coffee. Not much of a scene. Vincent smirked. Well, you know how folks talk. He leaned back. So, what's the plan? He wasn't asking out of curiosity. Vincent and I went back years, and he knew me well enough to see the gears turning. Not gonna sit around while they pretend nothing happened, I said. I want to know who he is, where he came from, and I want to make sure they both understand something real clear. Actions have consequences. Vincent gave a slow nod. You looking to burn it down or just make it hurt? I met his eyes. Just making sure they don't come out clean. He exhaled through his nose, considering. Then he reached for his phone. All right. Give me a day. That was the thing about men like Vincent. You didn't need to explain twice. You just needed to point them in the right direction. I finished my coffee, stood, and clapped a hand on his shoulder. Appreciate it. Don't mention it. I walked out into the cold, hands in my pockets, eyes scanning the town. I wasn't a man who looked back. Forward was the only way that mattered. By the next evening, I had everything I needed. Vincent didn't waste time. When I stopped by the hardware store, he handed me a folded piece of paper with nothing but a nod. I waited until I was back in my truck before I opened it. Zachary Jacobs. 38. 2 years in Clearwater. No real ties. Paid in cash for most things. Got a couple of minor assault charges back in Seattle, bar fights, nothing serious. But he had a habit. A pattern. Women, mostly married, the kind looking for an escape. He'd been run out of a town before, a husband handling things the old way. But Zachary? He kept finding new playgrounds. That was good. Men like him were predictable. I started with his job. He sold art, commissions through an online site. Mostly vanity work for people who liked throwing money at things they didn't understand. I made a few calls, talked to a friend in cybersecurity, and by the time I was done, I had a way to get his name circulating in ways he wouldn't like. I didn't need to lie. Just shine a light in the right places. The next step was Rachel. I wasn't out to destroy her. I wasn't even out to make her suffer. That part would happen on its own. People in towns like this don't forget, and they don't pretend not to see what's right in front of them. She'd feel it in the silence, in the half-second hesitation before old friends said hello. But she still had choices. She could hold her head up and own it, or she could run. That was on her. I parked outside her office and waited. She came out around 6, looking over her shoulder, shoulders stiff. She knew I'd come eventually. When she spotted me, she sighed and walked over, her hands shoved into the pockets of her jacket. Leo, she said, stopping a few feet away. I don't want to fight. I leaned against the truck, arms crossed. Good. You wouldn't win. She swallowed, glancing at the ground. You want to yell? Go ahead. Get it out. I just looked at her. You think I came here to yell? Her jaw tightened. She hated when I did this, stayed calm, didn't give her something to fight against. She'd always been the one to react first, to push for an argument just to feel something. I was never that man. I operated in silence and precision. I don't know what you want me to say, she admitted, voice lower now. Then don't say anything. She looked up, eyes sharp now. I didn't plan this, Leo. I didn't. But you did it, I cut in. You made choices. Now you live with them. She exhaled hard. And what are you gonna do? Ruin me? I smirked. Don't need to. You did that yourself. A flicker of something passed over her face. Regret, maybe. Guilt. Didn't matter. It was too late for that. I pushed off the truck and looked her in the eye. You're free, Rachel. You made sure of that. So enjoy it. I pulled open the door and climbed in, pausing just long enough to say the last part. But don't come looking for sympathy when the shine wears off. I drove off without waiting for a response. A week passed, and the town did what towns do. It talked. Not loud, not direct, but in the little ways. Conversation slowed when Rachel walked into her room. Women who once leaned into chat now gave her tight smiles and excuses to be elsewhere. The invitations dried up. The texts stopped coming. She wasn't the first woman to cheat, wouldn't be the last. But in a place like this, where reputations were built over decades and ruined overnight, she'd made her choice. People didn't look kindly on betrayal, and they sure as hell didn't look kindly on a man like me being the one betrayed. Zachary took the worst of it. The kind of people who bought his paintings, the wealthy weekenders who wanted a little rugged authenticity in their decor, suddenly didn't like his name attached to their purchases. Word spread that he was a homewrecker, and in a town built on familiarity, that meant doors closed fast. Vincent made sure of that, dropping his name in the right ears, pushing the story just enough to let it roll on its own. By the time I heard, Zachary had lost 3 commissions and was talking about leaving town. Didn't matter to me. I wasn't done yet. I ran into Rachel once, by accident. She was coming out of the grocery store as I was going in. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she looked away first, shifting the bag in her arms. Leo, she said, quiet. I just stared at her. She sighed, adjusting her grip on the bag. I don't expect anything from you. Just she stopped, exhaled. I made a mistake. I tilted my head. That what you call it? Her jaw clenched. You think I don't feel like hell? You think I don't wake up every morning knowing I wrecked my life? I let that hang between us, watching as she shifted under the weight of it. Then I nodded toward the parking lot. Where's Zachary? Her face flickered, just for a second. Enough. Not here, she muttered. I smirked, stepping past her. Figures. I didn't look back as I walked into the store. Later that night, I got a call from Vincent. He's skipping town, he said. Saw him loading up a U-Haul. But he'll be gone by morning. I leaned back in my chair, watching the fire flicker in the wood stove. Good. Vincent exhaled, the sound crackling through the phone. That it? I thought about it for a second, then nodded. That's it. I'd already won. There was nothing left to do but let them live with it. The next morning, I took my coffee outside and watched the sun drag itself over the horizon, turning the mountains from black to deep blue. The air was cold, crisp enough to bite, but I didn't mind. It was quiet out here, the kind of quiet that sat deep in a man's bones. The kind that reminded him he was still standing. Rachel was still in town, but she was keeping her head down. I heard through the usual channels that she'd put the house up for sale. Didn't surprise me. A woman like her wasn't built to stand in the mess she'd made. She wanted adventure, risk. What she got was consequences. Zachary was gone. Left overnight, took his things, didn't say goodbye. The kind of man who didn't stick around when things got hard. No surprise there. The cabin felt different now. Not empty, just, right? Like it was back to what it was supposed to be. A place for a man who didn't need much. A few days later, I was in town picking up supplies when I ran into Anna Dixon. She was outside the feed store, tossing bags of grain into the bed of her truck like they weighed nothing. She caught me watching and smirked. Didn't take you for the lurking type, Roberts. I walked over. Didn't take you for the manual labor type? She dusted her hands off on her jeans. Yeah, well, some of us gotta work for a living. I glanced at the bags. You running cattle? Horses, she said. Small ranch out past the ridge. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. I nodded. Straightforward. No fluff. I like that. She leaned against the tailgate. Heard about your situation. I smirked. Which one? She laughed, shaking her head. Fair enough. We stood there a moment, the town moving around us, and it struck me how easy it felt. No wait. No second guessing. Just a conversation between two people who understood something about how life worked. She nodded toward my truck. You ever get tired of all that quiet out there? Swing by sometime. Got a lot of work that needs doing. I glanced at her, saw the way she was watching me. Not soft, not searching, just steady. Yeah, I said. Might do that. She nodded, climbed into her truck, and pulled out without another word. I watched her go, then turned back toward the store. There were things to do, life to live, and for the first time in a long while, I was looking forward to what came next. A month later, the house sold. I heard about it from Fiona, who made it her business to know everything before the ink dried. Couple from Missoula bought it, she said, rocking slightly on her front porch, cane resting against her knee. Young, no kids yet. Bet they'll have a swing set in the yard by spring. She gave me a sharp look, waiting for a reaction. I just took a sip of my coffee. Good for them. She snorted. She's gone, you know. Packed up a U-Haul and left before dawn. I nodded. That part didn't surprise me. Fiona tapped her fingers on the arm of her chair, watching me like she was measuring my weight after a hard fall. You all right, Leo? I looked at the road, at the way the town stretched out quiet in the morning light. Yeah, I said. I am. And I meant it. I didn't ask where Rachel went. Didn't need to. That part of my life was over. She'd live with what she did, just like I'd live with what I learned. That's the thing about consequences. They don't go away just because you do. Zachary stayed gone. Good. The town had no use for him. If I had to guess, he'd pull the same routine somewhere else, find another woman looking for an escape, whisper the same tired lines. The difference was, I wasn't the kind of man to forget. I kept my ear to the ground, and if his name ever popped up again in a place it shouldn't, well, some lessons just take longer to sink in. As for me, I did what I always did. I worked. I took jobs out in the mountains, spent days tracking game for ranchers who needed a hand, cleared trails, fixed fences. Kept my hands busy, my mind clear. One evening, I found myself out near Anna's place, helping her patch a section of busted fence. She handed me a beer when we were done, both of us leaning against the gate, watching the sky darken. You sticking around, then? She asked, tipping the bottle toward me. I smirked. Looks that way. She nodded, satisfied. No pushing, no expectations. Just a simple truth between two people who understood that life didn't owe you a damn thing. You built what you wanted, brick by brick. As the wind cooled and the stars started to show, I exhaled, slow and steady. The past was behind me. The weight was gone. Some scars don't fade, but they don't slow you down either. They just remind you of who you are. And I knew exactly who the hell I was.